What's up, guys? UFC 324, Justin Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett has come to an end with Justin Gaethje winning by unanimous decision. I want to talk about most of the main card, the fights that went on, what I thought of them, what I thought of the new Paramount Plus era, all that kind of stuff. Mostly focus on Justin versus Paddy. But yeah, let's just get right into it. I think leading up to this fight, everybody was talking about how controversial it was that Justin and Paddy were fighting for the interim belt. And while Ilya is like waiting out on the sidelines, it makes sense that a lot of people were mad about this because Ilya hasn't been out that long. I think the last time he fought was in the summer of 2025. It has been over 6 months. So it is a decent amount of time, but typically not enough amount of time for an interim belt. But there was also a lot of rumors before this fight happening that Justin Gaethje was going crazy with his UFC negotiations and was basically saying, if I don't get a title fight next, I'm going to retire. So personally, I think they kind of had to make this an interim title fight, partially because Ilya is going to be out for a little bit longer. It seems like he's going to come back in the spring or summer. So it will be a full year, essentially, by the time he comes back. But I also think it was a way to appease Justin Gaethje in a sense, because if you have Justin Gaethje, one of the biggest stars right now in the UFC, retiring, it's a bad look for the UFC. It's not great for their new deal with Paramount Plus. And overall, they just need more stars in the UFC. They're kind of lacking on some star power, but it's a different video for a different day, different conversation altogether. And so, yeah, losing one of their biggest stars in Justin Gaethje would just not be great. So I'm kind of the feeling that the interim belt was not only just because of Ilya being out for a little while, but also because they just wanted to keep Justin Gaethje around and they needed to satisfy him somehow. And so an interim belt kind of made the most sense. Putting him up against Paddy Pimblett for it, though, that was the bigger controversy, of course, where everybody was saying, you know, it should be Arman. Arman Tsarukyan is the number one contender in the 155-pound division. He's been overlooked and he's being sidelined by the UFC and Dana White for some reason. For some reason, it just seems like Dana does not like him. I don't think that's enough to be throwing the number one contender to the sidelines and not putting him in his rightful place, fighting for a title or fighting at least for an interim title. But it is what it is right now. And honestly, I think it wasn't great at first, where Arman was just kind of sitting out on the sidelines, not doing too much, not really talking to the media, the press. That was a bad look because it just looked like he was just kind of sitting out, waiting, and nothing was happening. And the UFC just did not want to book him for a fight. But now Arman's been able to take advantage of all this, and he's been on a bit of a press tour or like a media run for the last few weeks, which I think has really upped his kind of stock and has really made fans like myself actually more interested in him and more interested to see his next fight, what he does next, and builds him up. So in a way, I think it's been great for him. But at the same time, if you're thinking about this purely as a sport, it doesn't make sense that the number one contender is not fighting for the interim title. So it really should have been Justin versus Arman or Paddy versus Arman. But it is what it is. We got Justin versus Paddy. And to me, I wasn't too mad about it because I knew it would be a crazy fight. Sure enough, it delivered. So I think at the end of the day, all the fans are happy that they got a crazy good fight with Justin and Paddy. Is it missing Arman Tsarukyan? Yes, it is missing Arman, but at the same time, I do think he'll be back sooner rather than later, and it's just going to build up his stock even more, and I think him versus whoever the champion is at the end of the year will be a huge fight. So going into Justin Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett, Paddy was the favorite to win, which in my opinion was really, really surprising. Justin Gaethje has been an underdog, I think 9 times in his UFC career out of the 15 fights or something like that he's fought, which is absolutely insane considering the fact that this guy just destroys people, always has an all-out war. He's won a majority of his fights in the UFC, and very convincingly so. And yeah, honestly, the fact that Justin Gaethje was an underdog in the first place, he wasn't a massive underdog. I believe he was a plus 187 by the end of fight week, which isn't massive, but I truly thought that this was a pick'em fight. Like, I thought this was a 50-50 fight, and I think to have Justin Gaethje, a legend of the game, somebody who has put in so much work and has shown everybody what a dog he is in the sport, I think it was a little disrespectful to have him as an underdog once again, especially up against somebody like Paddy Pimblett, who's still on the up and up, kind of coming through the rankings and has only fought, mediocre competition, if we're all being honest. That being said, Paddy Pimblett was on a 9-fight win streak, with his last 3 wins coming from, let's see here, Tony Ferguson, Bobby Green, and Michael Chandler. And those names, in my opinion, they're not the greatest. I think a lot of people still give them a lot of stock, especially Bobby Green for some reason. I don't know why, but for some reason, a lot of people still talk about Bobby Green fights as if there's something massive and he's got a bunch of power in his hands and he can do this and that. And Bobby Green has just been a really inconsistent fighter, so I didn't really take much of that. Same thing with Tony Ferguson. He was on, I think, a 6 or 7 fight losing streak by the time he fought Paddy. He's washed up. It just wasn't the way it was going to go. And even so, it was a bit of a tough fight for Paddy. He was starting to look gassed near the end of the second round with the Ferguson fight, and he was definitely looking gassed near the end of the third round with that one as well. And I think the UFC was really teeing him up to, give him a big knockout with Tony Ferguson being washed and having coming off of that big, long losing streak. But he couldn't get that done, and that was a bit of a sign for me as well that I don't know if he can, stand up to Justin Gaethje's power and his durability. And then same thing with Michael Chandler. Unfortunately, Michael Chandler at this point has just become a bit of a laughingstock in the UFC and to the fan base. It's kind of sad to see, honestly. At the same time, the outcome of that fight, I was not surprised either. To be fair, I didn't know or think that he was going to TKO Michael Chandler, but at the same time, I was not surprised. So even with his 9-fight win streak and the 3 of those wins coming from pretty big names, I didn't think that Justin Gaethje was going to be an easy fight for him whatsoever. So for him to be the favorite in the fight was a bit of a shock. And of course, at the end of the day, we all saw what happened, and Justin Gaethje proved that he was not the underdog. He should not have been the underdog. He thoroughly beat Paddy Pimblett through almost every single round. I think a lot of people give Paddy shit because of his overconfidence or just his cockiness throughout the fight week, but in my opinion, what else are you supposed to do? You're a fighter, you believe in yourself, you think you're going to win, so you're going to go out there and you're going to show off and, try to portray yourself as confident as possible. But at the same time, Justin Gaethje also warned against this, where he talked about it, where he was saying, these young fighters, or at least he was talking about Paddy in the first place. He was talking about how he was a little bit overconfident, talking about how, he was going to go out there and change Justin Gaethje's face. And at the end of the day, that's not what happened whatsoever. And even Justin himself said, look at your face. It's not the same. So overall, Paddy's confidence, it made sense. I didn't think it was really a sign of anything. But yeah, I think also his game plan just seemed all over the place. Look, I'm not a professional fighter. I'm not even an amateur fighter or anything like that. But I have to say, I agree with Dana White's comments and a few other people online as well, where it was a bit of a shock that Justin Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett had such a war on the feet, and Pimblett didn't seem to be going for as many takedowns as people thought, or at least Justin was able to stop all the takedown attempts or a majority of them. And it was really interesting to see that, Paddy wasn't fighting for that more. He wasn't going for that takedown as hard as he could have, or as hard as he should have, or as much as we thought at the very least. Who knows? Maybe he was trying his best in there to get the angles and get that takedown, but Justin Gaethje's defense was just too much for him. At the same time, I think a lot of people say that, but in my opinion, I think people forget that, you're getting your face bashed in by Justin Gaethje in there. As soon as that bell rings and Justin is all over Paddy, just throwing blows with knockout intention, I think that takes away from your game plan as well, where all of a sudden it's, oh shit, how do I survive the next 30 seconds to try to reset and figure out what I'm going to do next? And so Paddy not initiating some of those takedowns or not going for as many as people thought he would, that also could be he was just completely overwhelmed. In that first round, I thought for sure Justin was going to knock him out by the end of the first round. It looked really bad for Paddy. There was a lot of moments in the fight like that where it just looked really bad for Paddy, and it almost looked like he got saved by the bell at least twice, where Justin looked like he just could have finished him off with a few extra blows. And if that bell didn't ring for another 5 seconds, I think the ref would have called it off. So I think there is that to be considered as well, where, Paddy, he did not look the same by the end of that fight. And if you're having to go through that brutality the whole time, a lot of your game plan is probably going to go out the window, and you're just going to be fighting for your life. The last thing I want to say about Paddy too is that I did think it was going to go this way for him, where I thought he was going to lose. I thought he was going to get knocked out by Justin Gaethje, to be honest. And he almost did multiple times throughout the fight. But I did think that he was going to lose. And most of that is because if you look at fight analysis online, shout out to The Weasel on YouTube. He made a great video about this, and I fully agreed with his opinion. When you look at Paddy and his fighting style, a lot of the time, he's got his chin way up in the air, especially as he's throwing shots. Sometimes he's throwing shots and he's completely off balance, where his feet will be right beside each other or something like that. Or he's overextending while he's throwing a punch and he's got his chin way up in the air, and it's just so susceptible to counters. So I thought for sure that Paddy was just going to keep his chin in the air. I didn't think he was really going to improve on any of that from between the Michael Chandler fight until now. And so I thought Justin Gaethje for sure was going to take advantage of that. He's one of the heaviest hitters in the game. And of course, sure enough, Justin Gaethje landed a ton of overhand rights, among other things. And a lot of that was in the times where Paddy looked off balance, or he had just thrown a shot and his chin was way up in the air, and he did not have his hands next to him to block anything, and it was just a free shot for Justin. Now, in terms of Justin Gaethje, once again, I did not think he should have been an underdog. If anything, I thought it should have been a pick'em fight, but the fact that he was an underdog probably made quite a lot of people a lot of money, so good for them. I think a lot of people are putting too much stock in his performance against Max Holloway. To be fair, Max Holloway essentially outclassed him for 5 rounds when they went toe-to-toe, and then, of course, gets knocked out in the last second of the very last round, which, of course, one of the most famous knockouts and one of the most beautiful knockouts of all time. And to be fair, I also thought that was going to affect Justin's chin massively. He did come back to a 3-round fight with Rafael Fiziev, which, to be fair, Fiziev took that fight on 11 days notice, and I think that also played a part in how people thought Justin was going to perform in this fight as well, thinking that, Fiziev was on 11 days notice, they went all 3 rounds, he wasn't able to knock him out, and the fact that Fiziev was able to secure multiple takedowns on Justin. So I think that also put in a lot of people's minds that Paddy was going to be able to secure that takedown, get him on his back, and submit him. But that being said, when I rewatched the Fiziev fight, all I saw was how brutal Justin Gaethje is, how brutal his shots are, how much of a chin he has, how hard he hits, and how much damage he puts on the other person. Rafael Fiziev, honestly, I thought when I first watched that fight live, I thought Fiziev was going to win that fight because he was just so fast. But even with Fiziev being so fast, Justin was able to land such hard shots and get his timing correct enough that it brought Fiziev down, slowed him down, and at the end of the day, won the fight. And Justin took some crazy punishment in that fight as well. But watching that back, it kind of made me think, I think a lot of people are underestimating just how tough Gaethje is, and people are just thinking too much about that last second knockout with Max Holloway. I think Justin talked about this during fight week as well, where he was saying how so many people were just underestimating him. People weren't thinking anything of him and thinking that Paddy would run right through him. And honestly, even though I said I don't take much stock in Paddy Pimblett's demeanor and him being so crazy confident, Justin Gaethje, I have to say, when I was watching the interviews throughout fight week and he was just talking with absolute confidence, it did make me feel a certain way, where I just kind of thought, he has something about him and he's talking with this confidence that I just think he is going to pull it off. And his self-belief really just echoed through those interviews, and I really thought, okay, I can feel that self-belief, and I believed it too. There was a really interesting clip during the pre-fight build-up, and it was Justin Gaethje talking about how he's been training as an athlete for combat sports since he was a child. But I think what really struck me was that Justin talked about his body more so as a tool than anything else, where he was saying, I've trained my body to go through this kind of brutality, to go through these kinds of things. I've trained it. And when he was talking about his body as a tool, I think that, to me, again, was another another reminder of the fact that Justin Gaethje is going to go out there and throw with killer intent, with reckless abandon, and just go out there and use his body as a tool to win this fight, rather than thinking about things extremely technically or, being a little conservative with different shots. I think that's just not how Justin Gaethje works. That's not ever his plan. And so, yeah, I think that built up a little bit more confidence for me to be choosing Justin Gaethje to win in this fight as well. Something else that was talked about during fight week was the potential staph infection that Justin Gaethje had. You could see something on his neck. He claimed it was some sort of pimple, ingrown hair, something like that. And then when asked about it again by another reporter, he immediately dismissed it, did not want to talk about it. So personally, I don't see how that could have been something as simple as a pimple or ingrown hair, something like that. A lot of people really did think it was staph, especially because of his performance in the octagon. I know I just praised Justin Gaethje, but I have to say I do agree with a lot of people online that it did look like probably one of the worst versions of Gaethje that we've seen. He was still a brawler, still took things on the chin and did not go down. He went through the entire fight just winging crazy heavy shots, but it did almost look more like a bar fight brawl than it did a technical fight, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think for me as a UFC fan, and for a lot of UFC fans, that is really entertaining. I do enjoy technical fights as well, but the backroom brawl kind of style fights as well, that's what is really entertaining. So I'm not sitting here complaining that it was not a technical fight. I'm just saying this to say that, if that really was staph infection for Justin Gaethje, you got to think he was nowhere near 100% health, may have been on antibiotics, went in there, still put on a performance, still beat the shit out of Paddy Pimblett, still won the interim belt, and didn't look like his normal self. So all the props in the world to him. But I do have to say, it did look like he was more sluggish than usual. It didn't look like peak Gaethje performance. But that being said, if it really all was up to a staph infection, or because of the staph infection, I should say, then I'm hoping in his next fight, most likely against Ilia Topuria, the undisputed champ, I would hope that he would look a lot better than he did versus Paddy Pimblett. So overall, if he really did have a staph infection, I think honestly, it kind of makes you question Paddy Pimblett as well, because it makes you wonder if Justin Gaethje did have staph, if he was on antibiotics, if he wasn't near 100% for the fight, what does that say about Paddy Pimblett and his skills? Because Paddy got dominated. And to be fair, we might be looking too much into this. There's a chance it wasn't a staph infection, and maybe Justin Gaethje just looked the way he did because he's getting older, his technique was poor, or maybe we're not giving enough credit to Paddy as well, where maybe he was changing up the style enough that Justin had to change his style. Or we're not giving enough credit to Gaethje, where Paddy can be an awkward fighter at times, and maybe Gaethje, his game plan was to also be awkward to combat that. Overall, I was just shocked that the fight went the full 5 rounds. I thought Paddy did a great job of staying in the fight. I really, really did not expect him to go all 5 rounds, especially by the time it was after the 3rd or 4th round. I really just thought, man, he has taken a beating. And, a lot of people, after taking that bad of a beating and being bloodied up and all of that, in so much pain, a lot of people would have taken the easy way out and just fall over and say, I'm done, or, say I'm good in the corner. Maybe not a lot of people, but some people would. And so I got to give him credit for that. And I think a lot of people are going to give him credit for that as well. I did think he got saved by the bell quite a few times, but I do think it exposed a lot of the major holes in Paddy's game to the entire 155-pound roster. So I'm curious to see how the next person approaches a fight with Paddy. I'm also really curious to see how Paddy makes his adjustments to his defense, his offense, everything for his next fight. So in terms of what's next for Justin Gaethje, obviously it should be Ilia Topuria. Since Justin is now the interim title holder, I think he just has to fight Ilia Topuria, the undisputed champ, next. That's how it always is. That's how it should be. That's how it's supposed to be. But in this era of the UFC, you just never know. I'm really hoping everything in Ilia's personal life is being able to get fixed and kind of get back to some semblance of normal, and that he's able to get a good training camp in, a good fight camp, and he's able to hop onto the UFC White House card, Ilya versus Justin for the undisputed 155-pound title. I think that just has to be next. There is a little bit of talk online about Justin Gaethje potentially getting a fight with Conor on the White House card. I highly doubt that that is going to happen. I really just don't see it. I think Justin has been really clear over the course of his career, and especially over the course of the last few months, that his ultimate goal is to be the undisputed champion. He's been the interim champ before, he's been the BMF champ, and now he's the interim champ for the second time. And I think he knows that this is the last shot at the title run. I think he's talked about it, honestly. So for him to give up a shot at the undisputed title against Ilya for a big payday against Conor, I don't think it would happen. I wouldn't be 100% shocked, because we all know that Conor fight for whoever Conor's opponent is always going to be a massive payday. And we did see somebody like Dustin Poirier, who back when he fought McGregor for the second time and knocked him out, there was talks that, because of that performance, he probably could have and should have been up for the title fight. But he decided to say, I'm good off that. Let me pause, and I'll take the Conor rematch first before I go for the title fight, which obviously it's all to do with the money. And these fighters, they are prize fighters. It makes sense. You want to make the most money possible. So I wouldn't put it past Justin Gaethje to say, yeah, I'll take that Conor fight if it truly was offered to him. But again, I just don't think it aligns with Justin's personal goals. I think he's been very clear that he wants to be the undisputed champion no matter what. That is his goal for his career. So I think even if he was, for some reason, offered that Conor McGregor fight instead of the undisputed title fight with Ilya Topuria, I think he would turn it down and wants that Ilya fight. Also, let's just say something like that does happen and Justin decides, yeah, you know what, I'll take that Conor fight. So what happens then? Like, imagine we're on the White House card and maybe co-main is Conor McGregor versus Justin Gaethje, and then the main event, they would put Ilya Topuria versus, imagine if they just said, screw it, let's put our number one contender in properly and let's have him fight Arman. I don't think that's going to happen whatsoever. But if that was to happen, I think it would also ruin the meaning of the interim belt. Again, we already saw there were so many issues with the interim belt when it came to Tom Aspinall and John Jones. And so for Justin Gaethje to work so hard, talk about, I'm going to retire if I don't fight for a belt. Then he goes and fights for the belt. He wins it fair and square. He earned that interim belt for sure. And then for him to give that up for a payday for fighting Conor McGregor, and then the interim belt not really meaning anything, because then if somebody else was to fight Ilya Topuria instead of Gaethje next, then what happens to that interim belt? It just meant nothing. At the end of the day, Gaethje essentially fought for nothing. I don't think it would make any sense. I think the UFC is kind of in a position where they have to make that fight now, where Justin's been very clear about his goals. He wants that undisputed gold, and the interim belt is wrapped around his waist. I think they have to make that fight. Anything else just wouldn't really make sense. Moving on to Paddy, I don't think this really does anything terrible for him and his career. Obviously, any loss really sucks for a fighter, but the fact that Paddy didn't get knocked out, I think, is a major win for him. Even though he did not look good against Justin Gaethje, he definitely got destroyed in that fight. I think a knockout would have looked even worse. And so going all 5 rounds, I think a lot of people are just going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say, Paddy showed an immense amount of heart in there. He showed he still has a great chin. And, I think people are also going to give him grace on the fact that he's 31 and Justin Gaethje is 37. And so it means that Paddy has more time to develop his game and get back to that title run. In terms of a next fight for him, I think he definitely will have to fight somebody outside of the top 5. I'm curious to see if he's even going to be ranked in the top 5 anymore. I highly doubt it. The rankings have not come out yet since that fight. I'm shooting this on a Monday, and so we'll see where he ends up in the rankings. But I do think somebody like a BSD or Dan Hooker would be a great fight. They're obviously fighting within the next week. They're going to be fighting on UFC 325, Dan Hooker versus Benoit Saint-Denis. So I think either the winner or the loser of that fight. Both people would be great matchups for Paddy Pimblett. I think stylistically, they're both really fun fights. I think they're also more 50-50 fights as well, where it's still tough enough competition where Paddy won't just get an easy win. But I do think there is a path to victory for Paddy as well. So I think those two would probably be the best fights for Paddy next. Those are the people that I would like to see, unless for some reason they give him to Arman Tsarukyan, which could also see that. But I think that would be too much of a risk for the UFC, where Paddy is still, even with this loss, I still think Paddy is a huge star for the UFC. He's one of the biggest stars currently in the UFC. And so to feed him to somebody like Arman Tsarukyan, who I think would just obliterate Paddy Pimblett, especially based on Paddy's performance against Gaethje, I think it would be a terrible mistake for the UFC and something that they probably don't want to do, because I highly doubt they want to get rid of any of that star power. So giving Paddy Pimblett somebody like Dan Hooker or BSD, a more winnable fight, but still a tough fight, and still a fight within the top 10. I think that's the way it should go. Overall, again, I just don't think that Paddy lost any star power when he lost to Justin Gaethje. I'm actually more excited for his next fight than I thought I would be. I thought I would kind of be like, okay, Justin beat him. That's it. It's over. But I have to admit, with the amount of heart that he showed, the crazy chin, and the options that are out there for Paddy next, I am really curious to see what kind of changes he makes to his game plan, how he changes up his offense and defense, and who he's going to fight next. I'm really curious how that's going to go. So I think there's still a lot of people that are up on Paddy, and I think he's got a ways to go. And there's definitely a way for him to get himself back into the title picture. So I'm really curious for that. I'm excited for his next fight, and we'll see what happens. So we'll move on with the rest of the card. I'm going to speed it up a little bit because Justin Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett were obviously the biggest stars and the main thing we wanted to talk about. So Sean O'Malley versus Song Yadong. It was an interesting fight. Sean O'Malley was coming off a 2-fight losing streak, almost has not won a fight in almost 2 years, I believe, with his last win coming from Marlon Chito Vera during his title defense. And then those 2 losses coming from Merab Dvalishvili, which, of course, as we all know, is one of the greatest bantamweights of all time and has defended his title multiple times. So you can't take too much away from Sean for those losses to Merab. I thought this fight versus Song Yadong was going to be a little bit more entertaining. I think it was quite slow to start, to be honest. And I was one of the people who thought Song Yadong won the first 2 rounds. This was interesting because there was a lot of conversation online that a lot of people were saying, oh, it was clearly Sean's fight to win. And there was a decent amount of people that were saying that Song Yadong took those first 2 rounds and could have won by decision. And to be honest, I thought that first round was close enough and it might have gone to Song. I didn't really know, but I felt like, it really could have gone to Song. And obviously the second round went to Song, which the judges, of course, they all agreed the same thing. And so going into that third round, I really was worried for Sean because I'm a fan of Sean O'Malley. I don't want to see him go on a tough losing streak. I'd like to see him continue to fight more in the UFC. So I was hoping he was going to win. I was rooting for him. And so going into that third round, I was a little concerned. I thought Song Yadong was up on the scorecards if I had to choose. I thought it was round 1 and 2 to Song Yadong. But I also said in the moment, it could be 1-1. There's a chance it could be 1-1, which means either Sean just has to get a 10-8 round and really prove that he won that last round, or I did think Sean going into that last round needed a finish to win the fight. So going into that third round, I was pretty skeptical. I thought Sean for sure had to get that finish, but as we saw, he put on a clinic in the third round. He really did a lot of damage to Song Yadong and clearly took that third round. But again, I seriously thought Song Yadong had won those first 2 rounds. So going to the judges' scorecards, even though Sean O'Malley clearly did more damage than Song Yadong, I thought there was a chance that Song might be able to pull it out just because of those 2 rounds. Sean ended up getting the win. I was surprised that it was via unanimous decision. I have to admit, I thought it was going to be by split decision, but I think I got to go back, rewatch that fight because a lot of people thought the same thing as me, that Song won those first 2 rounds, but there were a lot of people that also clearly thought that Sean O'Malley won that first round and the third, giving him the unanimous decision. So yeah, it's one of those fights that I think I want to go rewatch and check out, see what I missed, and I wouldn't be surprised if I changed my mind, and I think Sean won that clearly. But as of right now, when I watched it live, I did think Song took those first 2 rounds, but I'm not thinking it's a robbery by any means. Sean clearly did much more damage than Song Yadong, so I'm extremely happy with the outcome because I wanted Sean to win. I'm excited for his next fight, and overall, I think it was the right decision. In terms of what's next for Sean's career, I think it's a really interesting point in his career because this win, he absolutely needed this win to open him up to options for the title and to stay in that top 5 and really be relevant in the division and in the UFC as a whole. But I also don't know how many more fights are really out there for him. I think if Merab takes some time off from the sport and really rests and recovers before his next fight, I could see the UFC giving the title shot to Sean O'Malley against Peter Yan. I think because of their first fight was a 3-rounder. It ended in a controversial split decision for Sean O'Malley. And I think it was an extremely entertaining fight. I remember watching it live, and I just could not believe how back and forth the fight really was. And so there's that built-in storyline of the controversial ending, how back and forth the fight was, and how entertaining these 2 guys are. And now it's for the title. Sean wanting to reclaim his title, Peter wanting to get that loss back and defend his title. So we'll see how that goes. And if they don't give him Peter Yan the title fight immediately, I would say a fight with Corey Sandhagen is long overdue. I think a lot of people want to see that fight with Corey Sandhagen. People have been asking it for a long time. Stylistically, it makes sense. It would be a fun fight. Overall, I think those are the 2 best options for Sean O'Malley and what would come next, and at least the best options in terms of entertainment for fight fans. All right, so moving on to Derek Lewis versus Waldo Cortez Acosta. I have to admit, I was extremely disappointed with this fight. I really thought that these guys were going to go out there, especially Derek Lewis. I thought Derek Lewis was going to go out there and just start swinging for the fences. I thought this was going to be a first-round knockout for Derek or for Waldo Cortez Acosta. So the fact that it was a bit slow, it was a bit disappointing. And even though it wasn't a super technical fight, I did think that Waldo did a good job managing his distance, getting his timing down, making Derek Lewis miss, and I just thought he was clearly faster in most of the exchanges. In the second round, when Derek got hit with that jab and went down on his back, I thought he was pulling like the Charles Oliveira move that he did in the first round, where he was just going to lay on his back and wait for Waldo to say, yeah, get up, get up. And I think Waldo, it kind of looked like he was expecting that as well. But Derek just kind of looked like he was ready to give up. And basically, it looked like he just let Waldo Cortez Acosta go on top of him and finish the fight with ground and pound. And again, I'm not a fighter, and I'm definitely not a heavyweight fighter, so I have no idea what Derek Lewis was feeling and how much power Waldo has in those hands, but it did kind of just look like he gave up and rolled over and was like, nah, I'm done with this. So that was really frustrating to see, both as a fan and as somebody who had Derek Lewis as a part of my parlay, which missed just because of him. Obviously, personally frustrating, but I think overall it was also frustrating just as a fight fan to see what looked like kind of Derek Lewis giving up. But again, at the same time, I'm not trying to take anything away from him, and I'm not a fighter, so who knows what he was feeling in that moment, but it just wasn't as fun of a fight as I expected it to be. Waldo's now on a 3-fight win streak, with those 3 fights coming within the last 3 months. I believe 2 of those fights were in November of 2025, and then this 3rd fight against Derek Lewis, obviously in January of 2026. So, as we all know, Dana and the UFC love active fighters, and the fact that Waldo's in a shallow division, the heavyweight division, I think it puts him in a really good position to try to call for a title shot next, especially if they're not going to go with Tom Aspinall versus Ciryl Gane right away. And if they do go with that, he can easily call for a shot against the next person up, another contender in the top 5, and try to make sure he's in that number 1 position for the following title shot. Next up is Natalia Silva versus Rose Namajunas. Yeah, this was, as we all expected, went all 3 rounds, was a decision. Natalia Silva won by decision. Honestly, that's kind of it. That's all I got to say. And of course, we can't forget the fighting nerd Jean Silva versus Arnold Allen. This was another fight that I thought was going to be a lot more action-packed right out of the gate, but it was a little bit of a slow start, but by the 2nd and 3rd round, it became a lot more action-packed. It was really interesting to see Jean Silva's demeanor throughout the fight week. He was extremely emotional, as he typically is, so nothing really new about that. But I think what was the most interesting was he was so emotional throughout fight week, but then when it came time to enter the octagon for the fight, he just looked locked in. He tried to do that Alex Poatan Pereira look and just deadpan face, nothing, no emotion. And I thought, okay, that's how he's going to enter the octagon. And then when it's time to face off or the fight starts, he would go crazy. But no, he kind of kept that throughout at least the first round, which was shocking to me, but very interesting to see. But at the end of the day, he did pick up the pace in that second and third round and ended up beating Arnold Allen by unanimous decision. And of course, who could forget the Arnold Allen surfboard or the Arnold Allen skateboard meme that's going around right now. Jean Silva hopping on Arnold Allen's back and just hopping on there to surf and do a jump. I don't know what the hell that was. It was honestly like hilarious, and I think a lot of people liked it because it was funny. It was just a weird thing, but it's a fun moment. Now we have a great picture. Now we have great memes, of course, for all the degenerates on Twitter, myself included, who constantly are looking at UFC memes. So yeah, can't be mad at that. So those are my overall thoughts about UFC 324, what happened, what went down, what I think should happen next. Let me know if there's anything that I missed, anything that you want to hear about in the comment section down below. Let me know what I should make a video on next time. I'm excited for UFC 325, Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopez. That should be another crazy good fight. And of course, we'll talk about it on the channel here for sure. So yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in to the first episode on the Fight Mix. We're going to have a lot more content coming out about the UFC in the upcoming weeks and for the rest of the year. So make sure to subscribe, like the video, help support the channel. Really appreciate you guys tuning into that first episode, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Peace, guys. See ya.